This is Power BI and More from CRM Audio with Ulrik Carlson and Joel Lindstrom. This episode is sponsored by Maplytics by Analogic. Maplytics by Analogic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualizations and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 V9 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. Analogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV, delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services. We thank Maplytics by Analogic for sponsoring Power BI and More. Scott who? Okay, so I thought we were talking about a little bit earlier about going back to the basics, and so we have a lot of listeners who listen at our Dynamics people who've used CRM for a long time, but they're getting started with CRM, and so the first question or second question they ask is, how do you get your CRM data into Power BI?
Right. And interestingly, we have a whole lot of options when it comes to getting our CRM data into Power BI. And we can start out with the first or most standard method. And I actually just refer to this as the standard method. In Power BI, you click on Get Data. In your different sources, you type in Dynamics 365. There's one there called Dynamics 365 Online. And it basically lets you pick each table that you're interested in. And once you've picked all your entities, you pick the fields that you're interested in, and then it brings all that data into Power BI.
Okay.
That would say to be the easiest method, probably, but you do have a couple of other options too. And one of them is that you can actually use OData directly. So you can basically create an OData string for your opportunities that specifies the specific fields that you're interested in and pull just that information and just those fields into Power BI. And with OData, of course, there's the old OData version, the one that you actually can get automatically. If you're using the FetchXML builder in the XM toolbox, I'm using that more and more now, you can actually take any of your views that was created in FetchXML or build something in FetchXML and get the OData equivalent and basically just put that straight into Power BI, and it'll, narrow down to just those fields and put in any filters, if applicable, in there. And you basically just copy the string. It'll give it to you directly. That's the old OData version. You can also use the new version of OData, version 8.2. Currently, that one actually has a bit of an error that it doesn't pull just the fields that you specify. It brings in every single field. And Marius, the CRM Viking, have actually pointed out this in a couple of blog posts here this week, because he was trying to get all the data in here and actually figured out that instead of OData, he could actually use a JSON table to pull the data to and get the specific, just pull the specific field that he's interested in. And in doing so, we actually found out that the JSON version actually loads much, much faster than using the standard option or the old OData method.
Okay.
So we're building here on the possibilities, and the final option, of course, we can also use FetchXML directly with a few modifications where we actually use OData, but we use FetchXML to build the query and specify the fields that we want to pull, and of course what entity we want to pull information into Power BI. So that's about 5 different ways that we can get data into Dynamics.
So,
and of course,
the FetchXML one, is that leveraging the OData feed, or what kind of feed are you using when you use FetchXML?
So I believe it's leveraging the OData feed, but it contains the fetch. So you can actually look at it and see the whole FetchXML and see what fields, see the filtering, and it's in that familiar FetchXML format.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about some of the pros and cons of the new versus the old OData. What are the decisions you use to decide which one you should use?
So one of them is how easy are they to make? And the standard option is if you're new and just want to get started and pull some data, you may not be as interested in speed. So standard option is, of course, a possibility. If you want to play with some tools, use the Odata connection. You can get some additional speed, or you can use FetchXML. And I give you some comparisons here that I was pulling some different data using the different methods, the same data using different methods. And the old Odata version was by far the slowest, immediately followed by the standard way of doing it. And then using the JSON method, or using FetchXML was significantly faster. So it's more than twice as fast as the other methods of pulling data. That means like when you're building these data models and you're pulling your data and you're working with your models, in your data modeling experience, everything just goes much, much faster and much, much smoother. You don't have like those where you have to like sit around for 30 seconds, for a minute or 2 minutes, and wait for all your tables to load in order to get all the data and basically move on and do some of the more fun stuff.
So what you're talking about, these 5 different methods, that's if you want to get live data from CRM. If you want to get data that's not live, you could also replicate data to a SQL table and then use SQL or some other way to read that data, right?
Right. And that would actually be much faster than any of the other methodologies that you can use directly when connecting directly to Dynamics 365. But when we talk about getting live data, when you actually connect Power BI to Dynamics 365, you're pulling the data as it is right now. But when you're using it in your Power BI model, you can of course manually refresh it. But you are always relying on whenever your Power BI model, when you publish this to the Power BI service, whenever that refreshes. So if you have Power BI Pro, that can refresh about once an hour. If you're using the free version, that's once per day. And of course, you want to upgrade all the way to Power BI Premium, we can get down to, I think it's 6-minute intervals or something that we can bring the data down to. So there'll always be a bit of a lag with the Power BI data. So when we talk about the speed here that's getting in is in your data modeling experience. When you're working with it, putting your tables together, creating your report, how fast is it to work with the different methods? So it's very relevant when you're working with it, and the additional speed is really nice when you start building new models. But once your model has been set up and it's basically refreshing in the background, it doesn't really make as much of an impact.
Okay, so you mentioned old Odata is much slower than new Odata, but new Odata gets everything, and old Odata you can filter down. Did I get that right?
Yes, and currently it's because there's an error in the Odata connection that was actually pointed out by the CM Viking too. So if you check out his blog, he actually has a link to the Power BI community where you can go vote for it and get them fixed on that error. But the problem is if you bring in all your accounts and you say I only want the name, it actually also loads every single other field that's on the account table. And you can definitely tell on the load times, that's just take a lot of extra time, and you're also getting a lot of fields that you're not interested in, which of course you want to avoid.
Okay, so here's the question. If Odata, let's call them original Odata and new Odata. If original Odata is slower, but you can filter it, and new Odata is a lot faster, but you can't filter it, if you've got an entity that has 300 fields and you only want 2 of them, will using a filtered old Odata feed give you faster performance than new one with everything?
So with 300 fields, that's a good question. So I can give you some comparison here. So I loaded 11,000 records, and the old Odata version took about 8 seconds, filtered only to a couple of fields. So 8 seconds. Whereas the Odata, the new version, took about 20 seconds to load the same amount of records. But it loaded every single data. So it actually took over twice as long for the new Odata version. So it's faster, but it's loading more stuff that we don't need. So it ends up being slower. In comparison to the, if we bring in all the fields, the old Odata version is definitely significantly slower than the new version. So once that error gets fixed, and we have the new Odata to work with, it'll actually be pretty easy and very efficient to bring in new data into Power BI. And then hopefully around the same time, the FetchXML builder will be updated to the new Odata version, so you can basically just cut and paste those Odata queries and cut and paste them into Power BI directly.
Okay, so
Nudge, nudge.
I know that every time there's 5 different ways to do something, developers usually have a favorite or a pet and go back to the same method over and over again. Is that what you do, or do you try different approaches and go with whatever's faster with a specific scenario?
So I like to try things out, see what's coming out new and see what's working. It's kind of fun to see, can this take over my currently favorite method? I think there are some different options. I do like the standard version because for new people getting used to it, say I don't want to open up the XM toolbox and other stuff. It's very straightforward. It just works a lot slower than the other version. There is one area, or a couple of other areas that I think are relevant to making a decision on what way you want to go. And one of them is whether or not you need to pre-filter on the records that you are loading. Because normally Power BI say when you don't want to load the accounts, it loads all 11,000 accounts, 100,000 accounts, or however many you have in the system. You can, with Odata and FetchXML, for example, you can say, I only want to load accounts in the state of Washington or the state of California, something. Narrow it down specifically to only what you're interested in. And significantly save times on the load times and basically getting your data model set up. So you could, if you have a transactional table with a couple million records, that's going to take a long time to load. You could just load the first 50,000 or the 100,000 while you're building your model, and then change the query a little bit afterwards once you're ready to load all the data, and you don't have to sit and wait what could be hours in order to get all that data. So Odata and FetchXML for matter has some benefits there that you don't really get with the standard connection. Because the standard connection generally always loads all the data first and then it filters it afterwards.
Okay.
So that's worth taking into consideration too. Once it comes down to you working with the data, I think there are a couple of areas that can be much of a nuisance to anyone working Power BI, specifically with the CRM data, and that is working with lookup fields and option sets. Because for a lot of the lookup fields and the options that matter, you just get the ID of the value of the option set of the lookup field. And then you have to get the option set values and their labels into a different table. And then you have to write a formula that replaces it, etc., etc. And you have to do that for every single option set that you have in your model. If you use the standard method of bringing in Power BI, and if you bring in use Odata, you only get the value. However, this is where using FetchXML have a great feature, is that you can actually bring in the label of the option set at the same time.
Oh, cool.
So it actually lets you expand your option set fields to have the value and the label too. So you're basically, if you have a table with 20 option sets, or even 10 option sets, you would have to create a calculated column. Normally, merge tables or do something else, and generally spend a lot of time just getting that data ready in order for you to be able to start doing some analysis. Using FetchXML instead, you can actually get that label right in there, so that'll save you a lot of time. So maybe FetchXML actually also loads really, really fast too, and actually almost as fast as the new Odata version. So but it also gives you that added layer and getting additional data and getting those labels in there. So it's just much, much easier to get started on doing your analysis. And I know you guys, when Scott was still there, you guys had Keith Mesha on the show and talked about the Power BI Query Accelerator.
Right.
That they had built, which is actually also now available for the XM Toolbox. So you basically just hook it up to Dynamics 365. You find the Power BI Query Accelerator, and you specify what view you're interested in, and they basically give you the queries to put right into Power BI. Just cut and paste them in there, and you get the labels, the option set values, the matching labels for the language of the user that you're logged in as. And it's just really nice and easy. I just want to highlight one thing there, that that tool is not in the XM Toolbox plugin store, you have to go find it on Sonoma Partners website, put in your email, and then they'll give you a download link for it. So hopefully it'll show up in the plugin store eventually. I know it'll likely be a big hit if it's not already a big hit. I don't know the download numbers, but it definitely makes my life a lot easier when we comes down to just making some, basically getting data quickly in and getting your data model and putting in all those labels, and the same thing with lookups, getting the names and the IDs at the same time, and loads very fast. So I would have to say my go-to is still just using that tool when it comes to bringing in data. I know there are some concerns when using the FetchXML there, that since it's using paging, it can only retrieve 5,000 records at a time. So using paging to get all the data, so you might run into some issues with some very large data sets. I'll be honest, I haven't run into any issues myself with it yet. But I have a feeling that was a recommendation that they put out just to make sure that, basically cover their behinds, right?
Right.
In case somebody ran it on 10 million records and it didn't work and started complaining.
Right.
But I've been using it for some fairly large sets without actually running into issues.
So on the option set question, the reason that the option set labels are funky to work with is because of the way Microsoft builds it to support multiple languages. So if you have Russian and English and Japanese, it has a label for each language, and the user that pulls up the record or looks at the view, that determines what label is shown. So how would that extend to Power BI if you had a multilingual environment and you had people with Spanish and English? Can you get both labels with one of these methods and smartly know which to display depending on what the user's language is?
So I think the important part of the question there is smartly display the correct one. That's probably the challenge in there. So if you're using the Power BI Query Accelerator with FetchXML, or just use FetchXML in general, it'll display the label of the language of the logged in user. So whoever you log into Power BI as and logs in, that's the label language that it will get.
Okay.
What you can also do is you can use Json, again, to actually retrieve a table for a specific option set, and that'll retrieve all the values and all the different labels for the different languages. And then you can make that a part of your data model to display the right language for the right reports. One challenge there is, as you're saying, can it then just smartly display the correct version depending on who logged in? That's going to be a challenge because Power BI itself doesn't really know much about the user that is logged in. It just knows what data you have access to. So you would have to have, if you had a Spanish version and an English version and a Russian version, you would need to have a different version depending on the language that you have. And I'm sure there are other things in the report that you would want to localize as well.
Okay, so if you use FetchXML, it runs in the query. It runs in the context of the user viewing the report, and so it would get the labels. If you're using Odata or one of these other approaches, is that running in the context of the user as well, or is that running in the context of the person who writes the report?
So that is running in the context of the person who writes the report.
Okay.
However, the Odata doesn't get you any of the labels. It'll only get you the actual data that's in the system. So you're not going to have that multi-language issue there.